All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown. All three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones. This is book number 3 in his Indian Lake trilogy of horror novels. I think that's what the trilogy is called. Let me double check. Let's see. It's what does this say here? I was right. The Indian Lake trilogy, book 3. I was spot on with that. That's why I'm the #1 television program in the history of the universe. Anyway, as you know, well, maybe you don't know, but I did read and review the first 2 books in the trilogy. The first book being My Heart is a Chainsaw. The second book being Don't Fear the Reaper. Now, if you want to watch those book reviews, before you watch the book review I'm going to do for book 3, just type in my last name, Durfee, into your YouTube search bar, and then type in Stephen Graham Jones' name, and those video book reviews will magically appear upon your computer screen via some sort of wicked sorcery that I just haven't figured out yet, but other sorcerers have, and it happens that way. Trust me. You got to trust me on this. So, let's talk about a couple things. All 3 of these books are also published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press, the same company that the same publisher that publishes all my books. And no, they did not ask me to do these reviews. I do all book reviews of my own volition. I only read books when I want to read them. I only read the books that I want to read. And if a publisher begs me to read a book and I ain't interested in it, or I'm not in the mood to read it, I don't do it. I pick and choose what I want when I want. And I picked and chose these when I wanted and when I wanted. Let's get to book number 3. Well, no. Let's do the covers first, because we always start the reviews with the cover. You know I love graphic design and cover illustration, and Saga Press always does good graphic designs. This one has a great design of some bear claws, and as you can see, all 3 books have a kind of a similar themed cover scheme, where the title of the book just covers the entire cover of the book, and then there's a little icon, like this one has a bear claw. This one has, what does this one have? Something. It's got something, and then this one has like a electrical outlet. I don't know what that is exactly. Oh, it's a hook. And something else. Anyway, they all look good on the shelf together. They all look like they go together in a trilogy of some kind. So that's good. Good job, Saga Press. Let's talk about book number 3, The Angel of Indian Lake. But before we talk about book number 3, let's talk briefly about these first 2 books. Now, this is a trilogy that takes place in a town called Proof Rock, Idaho. Small town, sort of a touristy town. A lot of rich people are starting to move in because it's very picturesque. But it's still got that small town feel. It's got the feel, it's got the people that don't want the tourists. They don't want the rich people buying all the property. They just want to keep the small town. Now, as we learn in book 1 and 2, in book 1, we understand that there's a history to this town where there was the Indian Lake, there was a flood, there's a bunch of things under Indian Lake. I'm not going to tell you what they are, because that would spoil some of these other books. And then in book 2, there's in book 1 there's a bunch of stuff under the lake, plus there's like this crazy haunted youth camp out in the woods, kind of like, how a lot of the horror stories have youth start with a youth camp in the woods and then a serial killer shows up. Similar. Book number 2 is about a serial killer named Dark Mills South, who becomes a serial killer and sort of ends up in Proof Rock. Now, our main character in all 3 books is Jade Daniels. And I keep calling her Jaden Daniels. And I don't know why, and I think it's because Jaden Daniels is a very famous quarterback in the NFL. And I just keep referring to her as Jaden Daniels. This is Jade Daniels. Jade. Not Jaden, not Jaden, but Jade Daniels. Not Jaden Daniels, Jade Daniels. Anyway, she in book number 1 is a teenager. She's really obsessed with horror movies. Anything to do with horror novels or horror movies from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. She is just a history buff about all of that stuff. And her knowledge of those movies and books carries through sort of as a nostalgia trip for the reader in all 3 books. Mostly in book 1, some in book 2, and quite a bit again in book 3. We get a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of things that I end up looking up, like, because she references different bits of dialogue and different scenes from a lot of these different movies and books. And if it's a movie and I have never seen the movie, I kind of go on YouTube and YouTube the scene that she's referencing just to see if it's there, just to see what she's talking about. Most of it is a fun part. That's a fun way to read these books. Every time Jade Daniels references something from an obscure horror movie, I Google it, I type it into YouTube, I see if there's a clip of it, and oftentimes they're in. It makes the books better. Anyway, so this book starts out. It starts out Jade Daniels. She's a okay, so she's aged somewhat. I mean, she was a teenager in these other books. Now she's a little older. She's in her mid-20s, from what I could gather. And she's been in prison. She's been a felon. She's been in prison for, events that may or may not have taken place over here. I'm not going to spoil anything over here. But anyway, she gets out of prison and she becomes a teacher at the local high school, which I'm like, I don't know if they allow felons to just teach at the high school, but this is a small town. Teachers are hard to come by. I remember I grew up in Sevier County, Utah, which I relate to Proof Rock, Idaho, because a lot of the things in Proof Rock, Idaho are similar to the things in Sevier County, Utah. One of which is teachers just don't want to move to remote places and teach school. So sometimes they just have first person out of prison. Let's make them the English teacher. Who gives up? But that's kind of what's going on here. But that was a little bit like, okay. All right, but we get to know Jade, a little bit different of personality of Jade, through the classes that she's teaching. We get to know a myriad of students in these classes, and they become characters in the book. Everybody, like the school board, the community, even Jade Daniels herself, is kind of nervous about the situation of her being a teacher in here. And then, of course, since it's a horror novel, and we've got high school students again involved, mainly the ones that she's teaching in the class. And we got her past, and the past of the town, the past from the town itself, plus her past, and all of these horrific events that have taken place in Proof Rock, Idaho, all lead to the angel of Indian Lake, who is sort of this presence that's just kind of hovering over the story as a whole. It all comes to a head at the end with a lot of course, your horror, cliche, chase, murders, goriness, deaths. Not all the characters make it through all 3 books in the trilogy. I'll just say that. And they're great characters too. Small town, very Stephen King-esque. In fact, Stephen Graham Jones is my new favorite horror novelist to collect. I'm going to read the inside jacket just to give you a better idea of what's going on in the story that I could give without giving away spoilers. So, the final installment in the most lauded trilogy in the history of horror literature. Oh my God, the hyperbole is almost as bad as the intro to my videos, which is the #1 television show in the history of the entire universe. This is the most lauded horror trilogy in the history of horror literature. Okay, it's been 4 years since Jade Daniels, that's Jade Daniels, not Jaden Daniels, not the quarterback of the Washington Commanders. No, this is Jade Daniels, a completely other person. Okay, it's been 4 years since Jade Daniels last set foot in Proof Rock, Idaho. Since then, her reputation and everything around Indian Lake has changed dramatically. There's a lot of unfinished business in her hometown, from serial killer cultists to the rich trying to buy a Western authenticity experience. But there's one aspect of the savage history of Proof Rock, Idaho, no one has got the mettle to confront. No one except for a final girl, making her last stand, this time for everything. This is the story of the American West written in blood, and it's the story of one girl who doesn't know how to give up. A trilogy of generational trauma and stolen hope. I liked every single one of the books in the trilogy. I would give this one probably a 9 out of 10. I will tell you, book number 1 was my favorite. And I would say book number 2 and 3 are tied as slightly, well, I guess since this was my favorite, these would be slightly less than my favorite. But still 9 out of 10, pretty good. The trilogy as a whole, magnificent. Stephen Graham Jones, great writer, great horror stories. I'm collecting all of his horror novels. Just fantastic. The Angel of Indian Lake.